Yeah, so first of all, Andrew, I'm really, really glad to be here with you today. Evie, thank you for having both of us. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I know that you and I are kind of coming at it differently, Andrew, which I think will hopefully make for some interesting discussion here. As Evie said, I'm the Chief Communications Officer at Organon, and the company launched a year and a half ago. And our vision is to create a better and healthier every day for every woman. So really the first women's health company of its kind. We serve 140 markets, so we're very global, and we serve across many different disease areas. And, you know, as importantly, are also advocating and supporting women in their health. So, it's just been an incredible ride launching the brand, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it today.
Same, and you know this, but I'm obsessed with your journey, and I'm really excited to dive into it. I think that's a great entry point to one of the things that we have in common, amongst a few things, is that we both found ourselves working with purpose-driven brands. In my case, it took me a while to figure out exactly what I wanted to be a part of and to figure out what I can contribute to the greater mission of Nextdoor. In your case, it feels like purpose has been part of your path really since the start, and it feels like you've applied a lot of intention to it. I would love for you to walk us through a little bit about how you found purpose in your career, how that journey started, how it's evolved, and how you think about it.
Yeah, I love this question because, it allows me to be passionate and talk about my commitment over the years. So I don't know that I sat there and plotted every dot on a map and said, okay, I'm going to go here, 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 and here. But I have intentionally been very focused on being very mission driven. I think it's who I was. I always say I'm a great combination of a mom who was a social worker and a dad who was a chief financial officer. So kind of brought the best of caring about people, but also at the same time being driven to focus on growth and, really creating really strong financial businesses. My real awakening, kind of began when I was in college. I was, when you talk about purpose, my purpose was to do good things for women, and that's where it all began. I, started out as a, focusing on women's studies. It was kind of when it was the wild, wild west of women's studies, and then went on to get a master's in women's history. So very much obsessed and focused on women's rights and women's issues in the early part of my days. And then that spark really led me to Planned Parenthood, where I was lucky enough to become the vice president of marketing. I honestly would have done anything at Planned Parenthood. They could have asked me to sweep the floors, sit and just, file papers. But I was lucky enough to be with a team of some of the greatest reproductive rights advocates that we've ever had here in the United States. And just had, I could talk about this till I'm blue in the face, but I won't. And then, as I kind of sought out unique opportunities to apply my skills as both a marketer and an entrepreneur, I ended up on the agency side. Again, I always felt like I wanted to focus on doing right and doing good for patients, for women. I continued to focus on women. And then, I was really proud and inspired by becoming the CEO of Gci Health, where I was there for 11 years. It's one of the few award-winning specialty healthcare integrated communications agencies. We started out as a small boutique and we grew with an amazing team of people. And so the choice to go in-house at pretty far along in my career was very deliberate because, this purpose-driven career, which I really didn't even wasn't as deliberate about that career, but I kept going back to these things that I was so committed to and so passionate about and so focused on. The fact that the company was creating a business, focusing on creating this better and healthier every day for every woman, and their commitment to being, as we call it, here for her health, just seemed like a natural place for me to go. And I know we'll talk more about this, but, I just knew I was going to make a place in the right place for millions of women. And everything we've built at Organon has been from the ground up. And that has been a very, very exciting part of this. But, I would just say that purpose doesn't have to be calculated. If you feel it in your bones and in your heart, you can, and your brain, it's just about finding those places that make you feel like you're delivering on your purpose.
Yeah. I think there's two things I'd love to dive into a little bit more with that. One is defining that purpose for you. There's a lot of different frameworks. There's start with why. There's a lot of different ways for people at any point in their career or life to figure out, okay, how can I better define my core values? But what you've done over your career is really what at least in my case, I'll say, has fueled my satisfaction in my career, which is basically finding people that are pursuing those same goals and values and figuring out what you can contribute to the greater good and the success overall of that enterprise. I think that it's such a tailwind. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday in a different setting, but no matter how hard a day gets or how challenging something is or how disappointing something is, understanding why you're doing what you're doing is really what can keep you going and moving through those and motivate you in ways that money and title just can't. So I really do love that. The other thing I'd love to ask you about, because it started so early, marketing is a social science, as I learned through Googling it. Your background, what you studied in women's history, I'm curious where that exact kind of connection came into, because I do really understand that, child of CFO and a social worker. What was it that led you to move into that world versus academics or versus anything else?
Well, I have to be honest. Originally, when I got my master's degree and was on my way to my PhD, I was planning to teach women's history somewhere in the United States. And I think I kind of came to a place where I realized that being a Northeasterner, I was probably not going to get the job of my dreams at Columbia University or Harvard, because these jobs were very, very hard to come by in early days. So I landed in a company, which EB just referenced, called the National League for Nursing. And I had this amazing mentor. I went there when I was in grad school, but I had this amazing mentor who just saw this promise and spark in me. And she gave me this job as like VP of marketing. This was before Planned Parenthood. And I kind of like learned everything on the job. I mean, I thought many times, should I go back to school for an MBA? But I had such incredible mentors and so many great books, and became an avid reader of Harvard Business Review and all the traditional marketing books out there. So sort of a self-taught marketer. And then really learned a lot of what I did just on the job through experimentation, through trying new things, by trying to transform things. Probably in many ways, not as structured as many marketers might come to things because they have a different type of background and education. But we knew when we were succeeding and we knew when we weren't. We knew what would work. We knew what didn't work. And, I just knew that my most important focus was to take a look at the full range of things available to me, to look at messaging and how to storytell and, how do you embrace new channels and new ways to do things as part of that sort of marketing spirit that I had.
Yeah. It's amazing how that evolution can just sort of happen. Mine was similar. I thought I was going to be a teacher. So you've spoken about mentors in a couple recent articles. I think it's one of the more difficult things to do in our industry, regardless of where you are in your career, to find mentors. Sometimes you're lucky enough that it's a leader or a boss or a friend that just guides you. But how have you gone about throughout your career at these various points? How have you gone about establishing relationships with your various mentors? Have you had, are we boyfriend and girlfriend, or girlfriend and girlfriend, or boyfriend and boyfriend type conversations where it's like, will you be my mentor? How have you done that? And then on the flip side of it, how have you worked with mentees, and what's that dynamic been like?
Yeah, this is a great question, and something I could probably go on about for quite a while too. So, I've really been inspired by people who've brought more of a transformational spirit and have really pushed me to go way beyond my boundaries of thinking, doing, seeing things, and figuring out like there is no, right? It's all about the yes, and breaking down those barriers to get there. The one woman I will say who had the greatest impact on me, who EB actually knows, is a woman named Pamela Moraldo. She grew up in the industry when it was really hard to raise up as a woman. She had a very enduring impact on my career and my life. She wasn't always, stroking me and telling me, oh, you're so great, you're so great. She actually pushed me in ways that I never would have pushed myself. And I learned so many critical business lessons from her. She taught me, probably most of all, that as a woman, you really do need to kind of work harder than male counterparts to get your point of view across. And again, this is when I grew up in the business, and it might be a lot, hopefully it's a lot easier right now. But with the right level of preparation and organization and drive, I had as much of that power to make a positive impact on people's lives. And really, she pushed me so hard to do that. She was a huge change agent and visionary. Everyone didn't always agree with her. And me and my colleagues, sometimes we didn't either, but she always pushed those around her to think bigger than what might be possible on the surface. And that has had an enduring impact on me. I'll never forget when she said to me, and this was again very early in my career, I want to see strategies, only bring things in here that are strategic. And I literally went and called my dad and said, Dad, what's a strategy? Because I was trained in storytelling from history, right? And he's like, so again, he taught me what that was, and I read all the books, and I went in there. And now people drive people crazy because I'm all about what's the strategy? Let's not talk about something until we really have nailed the strategy, because then everything will fall in place. So she was a huge part of my mentor life. The other person who has been both mentor and an inspirer and a teacher to me is my dad. And I think you could say this about a lot of women, in my kind of generation, that our fathers have played a huge role in helping us build our careers. He has shown so many impactful lessons to me, the power of building something from the ground up. But most importantly, he showed me that companies are not built by one person, but by teams of people, right? Like having those people around you. When I went in as CEO of Gci Health, the first thing I did was figure out who are the people around me that I can bring together and who can complement each other and complement me so we can build a fantastic agency. My dad also, while he, in the early days of his life was working in a big company, he taught me how to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. And while I may not have started my own company per se, due to my own kind of life limitations and circumstances, I've always applied entrepreneurship in my work every single day. And I love the power of being able to apply entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial being and spirit in any type of setting, that people should not be ever held back from being entrepreneurs. I guess the only other thing I would say about mentees is that, as a woman, I believe it's up to women to seek out and support women however and whenever they can. That progress for us is built through this, especially for women. Again, when they reach certain points in their career, they have huge amounts of ability to support women who are younger or women who are looking for help. And I believe this should never stop. I also have to say I was very inspired recently by the head of communications at GSK. His name is Sri Ramaswamy, who said that, he showed a presentation that you can have a mentor at any age. And so I had kind of given up on having a mentor because I'm like, I'm too old for a mentor now. I can only be a mentor. And I think totally wrong. We should be seeking out mentors our entire lives.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think you seem to have gone with your gut in terms of A, understanding what it was you were being driven towards, but B, finding sort of kindred spirits or people that you thought you could learn from, and then really diving in, incorporating those lessons, passing them on to others. And absolutely, the part about either finding mentors or finding mentees, I think there's a huge part, being in a position of as much privilege as I have, finding ways to be of service, helping other people find ways to be of service. It's just a huge part of creating that sense of community and collaboration that it seems like you've been able to create throughout your career and certainly now at Organon. So thank you for that. So
Yeah.
Moving on to your experience with Organon, because it is really exciting. It is the first of its kind. It is servicing such an important sector. And it's been a standalone company for about a year now since the spinoff from Merck. I'm curious, in your role, what it's been like to build a new brand in the pharmaceutical category during a pandemic, focused on women's issues, and especially within this completely new context of having a brand mean so much and matter so much. Whereas historically in pharmaceutical advertising, the corporate brand was secondary to all the different products. Now Pfizer, Moderna, they enjoy 100% brand awareness. Things have changed. So how does that all kind of inform what you've been building and how you see it progressing?
Yeah, everything you just said are such great points. The piece around brands, corporate brands following product brands for the last umpteenth years, and the corporate brand being lost in the process and now being seen so high on people's radars, like Pfizer's, like Moderna's, is a really, really important point, because the world has really transformed when we look at healthcare and healthcare marketing. So, with Organon, we spun off a little over a year from Merck. What was really interesting about our spin was that we launched with both a very strong business strategy, but also it was very purpose driven. And I think it's very, very rare that you find this in any company, not just in health, to be able to bring together a strong business focus with a strong purpose around purpose, and they basically interlock, right? It's kind of like a dream, right? To be able to find that, because it's so authentic. We're not backing into things, right? We're like all in it together. We have 10,000 people who we call founders at Organon. We have very strong values. Obviously, we have our vision. One of the things that really struck us in the launch period was that, pharmaceutical companies typically kind of do things two different ways. One is either they've been for years just pushing content out. Here it is, read it, please, right? And then there was a time where companies started to really engage more, right, with social media and the rise of different tools. But there's still a lot of limitations on what you can and can't do. We took a very different approach in that we actually took a lot of time in the very beginning to listen to women. And what we heard was that they were really, really impacted by COVID, and they were doing a lot of talking, but nobody was really listening to them. So we launched with this commitment to listen, and we made a microphone, a simple microphone. I wish I was in my office at home because I could pull out all the different microphones I have to say, okay, this is our global symbol for our efforts. And so what we've done ever since then is taken, bold approaches to unravel stigmas and bust taboos, which exist throughout women's health. There's been very little change in women's health since I began in this business many, many, many years ago. I'm still quoting the same stats. So how do we bust through this? One of the ways we bust through this is by talking about it, right? We need to talk about these things, and then maybe they become more normalized. So everything we're really doing stems from our purpose to be here for her health. And our efforts are grounded in this consistent focus to keep women at the center and elevate these conversations about women's health inequities through our social channels, through the meetings we're at, through our partners, through our staff, like any way we possibly can. If you go on our LinkedIn channel today, we launched a brand new video. Would love you to take a look at it and love your thoughts on it, which is really all about the drive, the unmet need, but also, building communities. How important, I know you can relate to that, how we build communities.
Yeah, thank you. It is that overlap between empathy, purpose, and profit. Right? Mark Benioff calls it, I think, compassionate capitalism. It is amazing when it is so intrinsic to the mission of the company and of the brand. And I think the way that you've approached it through the listening campaign is so unique. But also it's so kind of like self-reinforcing. It helps you understand what you need to be and what you need to do to help support the people that you're supporting, the women that you're supporting, these issues that you're bringing more awareness to, which has to be just a wonderful way to wake up every morning.
Yeah, it is. And I will say just one other thing about it, which is, after a year of listening, and we learned from all over the world, and we heard things from all over the world, all different types of women. Now, obviously, what do we do? How do we, I'm not changing our tagline, but how do we act for her health? Yeah. And clearly in the US, we're in an interesting position, given everything that's going on in the environment around, things like contraception and maternal health, to really make a difference there. So more to come on that, but, clearly, just paying attention to the environmental factors that a lot of companies don't have to really pay attention to is going to be critically important for us as well.
So two things I want to dive into, and I'm going to sort of try to figure out how to make them both happen. For one, to your point, Organon is a global company. You're doing some amazing work in regions across the world. There's the Smart Families Project in Asia Pacific to address declining birth rates. You've launched in Saudi Arabia, which is really amazing, to advance women's health and prosperity. Obviously, there are just different factors, different cultural factors everywhere you exist, but you have a consistent and clear purpose. How do you navigate globally with such drastically different on-the-ground factors and attitudes across each of these different regions and still maintain that consistency and clarity of purpose?
You brought up one of my favorite things to talk about. So, when we spun off from Merck last June, we launched this commitment, as I mentioned, to listen to all women. So women all over the world, and all different types of women, high profile women, everyday women, et cetera, et cetera. And our one big resounding question was, what is the biggest unmet need in women's health? And we had some partners who also put that out on our social channels. We set up a platform, hereforhealth.com, where women could come and talk to us. We also, realizing we were doing this during COVID, So we did not have a lot of ability to get out there and see people and talk to them on our day of launch. We couldn't just go to media, outlets and just say, hey, we're here, let us talk to you. We did everything from the New York Stock Exchange pretty much. We built this huge wall where we had this wall of voices and these voices coming out, basically talking about these unmet needs. And to your point about, we're in all these different countries where women's rights and women's health issues are so different, gender equity issues are so different, where we're trying to insert the whole concept of how health plays a huge role in gender equity and vice versa. We found some really common themes from all over the world. Common theme number one was the fact that women, mental health. Okay, that's not surprising. But in this particular case, we found that women were actually talking about their mental health as it related to their reproductive health. Okay, that's an aha, right? That women struggling with painful periods, menstrual issues, endometriosis, the list goes on and on and on. We're struggling from a mental health perspective as well. Number two, no surprise, menopause. There's a lot of discussion bubbling up right now. And the list goes on and on, where we found these commonalities all over the world. The other thing is, mental health, creating more respectful maternity care, and especially in countries where women are sort of having issues during childbirth and experience loss of autonomy. And, we have some incredible projects going on now. So, if we look at unintended pregnancy as one of our biggest issues that we're focused on, we just launched our Her Promise ESG report. We launched a platform called Her Promise, where we made a commitment to lower unintended pregnancies by 2030 by 120 million unintended pregnancies. So that's a big, focus for us. And, one example of that is creating public-private partnerships. So in Mexico, our team is launching this awesome project where during COVID, teen pregnancy went up by 30% in some areas around Mexico. It's huge.
Wow.
You have an unintended pregnancy rate around the world of almost 50%. We're talking, work needed to be done there. And so this partnership will impact around 35,000, adolescents between Organon and, parts of the Mexican government. So we're feeling well equipped to deal with this and to understand and to talk, again, back to listening to our local colleagues and making sure we really understand it. A lot of people call it a global approach. I kind of call it like a global approach, like starting with local and going global.
Yeah.
So more to come on that, but definitely starting from a common place.
Yeah. So it's interesting because we think about community relentlessly at Nextdoor. Our purpose is to cultivate a kind of world where everyone has a neighborhood they can rely on. And so community is part and parcel of what we do. How do you think about community building at Organon and the role of community? Because there are all these different ways to view it, not necessarily define it, but different lenses that you can put on it. How do you think about activating through those lenses? What's the role of community play, in your work?
Yeah, so ever since we talked, I've been kind of like thinking about like the role Nextdoor can play in terms of community building around health. So I think, you have a really, really interesting opportunity ahead of you as you go forward, because at the end of the day, I think with COVID especially, the role of community has never been more important, and building those communities is just so critical. And we know that, we can build strong communities when, she's healthy, when she's empowered, when she's resilient, and when she prospers, right? And that leads to much stronger communities. So we really do need to foster that community of support to learn and advance with each other. And, part of that is around the listening, but part of that is like partnering with the right people. So, in traditional ways of doing things, usually pharma would partner with third parties. I think there's so much further to go here in terms of creating new kinds of communities where private partners with private. We saw that during COVID, right? Private companies coming together and seeking vaccines and drugs, et cetera, et cetera. We shouldn't stop doing that. Private partnering with, apps and, digitally, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we really need to look at what are these new forms of community that have sprung up out of COVID that will have the greatest reach and impact on patients and women to make sure we can really focus on their health the right way.
It brings to mind that overlap between the world of comms and media, in that so much of the work that we're talking about tends to live in the world of PR and comms. It's wonderful things that your brand is doing to live your vision, to live your purpose, to help the world in the way that you know you need to. I'm curious about structurally, what does it look like? What is the sort of infrastructure like between your team and the media team? Do they tend to lean into the work that you're doing, promote it through media channels, not just earned, but also paid, as a part of how they're defining success with the brand and moving the business forward? Or is it kind of a little bit more church and state?
So it's very integrated. So because of COVID, we've had to rely heavily on media.
Mm-hmm.
And media in terms of media planning and buying. And, it's interesting, coming from an agency that did media relations
Mm-hmm.
and not media planning, I think we all kind of thought of these at opposite ends of the extreme but I see the power now being in-house of communications and media, like hand in hand. One, because media has such a great handle from a insight perspective, right? They really can drill right into those insights that we might not otherwise have access to. And two, when we work really, really closely together, everything becomes integrated and amplified. We can extend the reach. So if media is not getting to one place, we can get to it another way, right?
Yeah.
But I think the conversation needs to start, because when you look at this traditionally, they're kind of sitting at opposite extremes of the table, not really understanding what each other does. And so I think if they came together closer and closer and closer, the insights, the ideas, the innovation, the outcomes, I think will be a lot stronger. And I've definitely seen that here. Definitely seen that here in terms of getting a really strong handle on what media is doing, what they're not doing, what we can do to supplement, what we should amplify. So, I look forward to seeing where we can do a lot more of that.
Yeah, if I can drill in, I'm curious how it's currently working. Like, is it monthly stand-ups? Is it reporting and analytics being merged into one? Are you looking for parity and metrics? How does it work right now?
Well, I always look at, and on the metrics side, I always look at the metrics pretty differently. I think communication still kind of needs to own how they report out KPIs and their metrics, because they're so different and kind of hard to understand, I think, to a lot of people. But I do believe that if we could find a system to bring them better together and create better understanding on both sides, it would create a much better outcome for the marketer themselves.
Yeah.
The way we're structured is, and it's not a structural thing, it's just the way we work, is it's really fully integrated. So our brand team could pretty much say that our comms team is part of their team. So whenever there's a relevant meeting, it's not as structured, it's not like come here monthly. It's like whenever there's a relevant meeting on a brand or an effort or a program or new things happening, our team is immediately invited. So everyone's kind of working in hand, whether it's creative, media, HCP, comms, it's just sort of intuitive to the way we're working.
I love that. I think that's a huge advantage too. There are so many organizations, especially legacy, massive organizations, where it's just sort of a more traditional view on swim lanes. And I think that being nimble, being collaborative, being integrated creates such an opportunity to play Moneyball, to basically find opportunities to leverage the strengths of each side and work more collaboratively to push everything forward. So I think that's fantastic. I hope we see more of that everywhere. So touching on how you guys have managed to kind of innovate in this space as you've launched. Pharmaceutical advertising historically, it has been not necessarily the space where people think about innovation first. It's a friend of mine always says it's a space where no one wants to be first and everyone wants to be second. So how do you think about working within that space, and how do you keep pushing forward with the status quo? And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the work that you're doing, as well as the workplace and the workforce. How are you guys thinking about kind of staying ahead of the curve?
So you brought back a memory to me of when social media became so, was really brought up as something much more we could do, let's say 5 whatever years ago. And I remember saying to clients for the past 5 years when I was on the agency side, everyone wants to be first, but nobody wants to be first, right? So you echoed that. It was nice to kind of remember back to that. Ultimately, just the way I operate, and I think it's because of the different roles I've had and the different people I've worked with, and some of my upbringing, disrupting the status quo has always been kind of this priority throughout my life. So, if you work in an industry like women's health, which has really been left behind in a lot of ways, I mean, think about it, it's 51% of our population is women, and yet we don't have a very strong women's health infrastructure in this country or even around the world, which we see tremendous growth in other areas. Like if we look at oncology, we look at neurology, we look at rare disease, like look at the growth there. So tremendous amount of work to be done. But ultimately, we just can't afford to keep doing the same old thing. And, we have to take it to be more bold and more purpose driven and, create an approach to drive down any barriers. And yes, there are many hurdles, and I will be the first person to admit to that. But I think, this is where we need to team up as people and figure out what roles we can play in all taking, a hand together in creating a better outcome, because we don't want to be left behind as marketers. We don't want to be doing things, in 2022 and 2023 that people were doing in like 2015. We need to push forward. We need to move ahead. We're trying to take more of a bold communications approach. We're working with our teams to try to challenge the status quo. Remember that we need to put ourselves in women's shoes, so to speak. And this is the way women are communicating today. And this is how they talk. And we need to kind of do away with some of the older ways of doing things and really embrace what's happening in the world. So, you know what? We need to give a powerful voice also to that diversity within our own walls, and, diversity within racial and ethnic diversity as well. And part of that is also, building an inclusive workforce at Organon. So, again, we're a year and a half out. We're doing our best to build a brand that makes sense for people in today's world. And much more of that to come. I'm excited about where the future is going to go.
Yeah. Do you within that, in terms of the not racial diversity of the workforce, but the specific factors that influence the BIPOC community, for example, do you think about partnerships as a way, or are there any partnerships, excuse me, you think about when it comes to focusing in on Black maternal care, as an example? Is that all stuff that you kind of want to build internally from a comms and marketing standpoint? Are there other partners or players that you think it would make sense to kind of collaborate with, either just from a theory standpoint or practical application? I'm curious how you think about it.
Yeah, so, we're really trying to open the lens and open the aperture on this and do things differently. One of the things we did in our first year, so on our anniversary, we launched our first ESG report, which is pretty amazing given the fact we've only been a company a year and we had COVID and this and that. So, that was really purposeful to be able to state our purpose. And one of our purpose is all around, driving gender equity. Obviously, there are issues like maternal mortality that disproportionately impact women of color, issues around fertility care, issues around unintended pregnancy. And, with everything happening in the US today, it's going to get worse before it gets better. So it's really critical, again, back to listening, that we listen to the people who are the experts, right? And learn from them and figure out then how do we support that? And how do we help them look at partnerships in a totally different way to see who's else out there who can help really make a difference. Yeah. So, there are tremendous therapeutic gaps that exist and more to come on that, because as we launch more products, we're going to see more and more of those gaps exist that we are very much committed to closing.
Yeah, it is such an amazing thing to lead with listening. And it's striking that it doesn't happen more, at least that we don't hear more about it, because it seems like brand purposes, brand identities are defined, and then hopefully find really creative ways to get them into this sort of, cultural consciousness and whatever the zeitgeist is. So Pfizer is a great example. Pfizer has done an incredible job of aligning their brand with just science, with just credibility and science. That's what people think about, and that's what their focus is on. But flipping it and thinking about what your patients and what your people really need, and then using that to help define what your identity is and what your strategy is. It's really, it's amazing.
And one of the things that's been exciting for us also is that, most of our deals have been with companies that are smaller. And what I love about it is that Organon has the ability and the capacity to take these products or these companies and bring them to everyone in the world, right? Eventually. So like, for instance, when we bought Lydia Health a year ago, that was sort of our first thing we did 2 weeks out of being a company. And we had this, device that was able to treat postpartum hemorrhage, which is one of the largest issues around maternal health here in the US and around the world. It gave us the ability to say, okay, we're going to be able to put one of these devices in the hands of physicians all over the world to reduce postpartum hemorrhage, which has such a big impact, especially in communities of color. So, it's sort of like this built-in purpose to our products in a way, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's outstanding. I mean, it's exactly, I would imagine it's what everyone kind of wants to be a part of.
I was just going to say, it's like the dream job for marketers in a way, because,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, even when you look at marketing a new product, you always love that part, that pre-part where you can do all this disease awareness and you're building, enthusiasm and anticipation for the product with scientific exchange, but also with, market development. And it's kind of amazing when you get these products that you can continue to like really develop the market through more purpose-driven activities.
Yeah. I mean, for those of us who have been in health and wellness marketing for a while, I think a lot of people enter and stay because of the just tangible impact that that your work, whatever your work
Absolutely.
is, has on that, on those outcomes, which is really amazing. I want to see if anyone does have any questions that they want to throw into the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to continue talking ad nauseum, possibly forever. Nothing yet.
No, you're not going to keep talking ad nauseum.
Okay, great.
But it
we're at
was
time.
Fantastic. No, that was just such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I thought, maybe Organon came from organic because it was organically flowing. Wendy, I'm going to quote you for a second. You talked about building strong business with strong purpose. And you also said that Organon started by listening to women, and you made a microphone as their symbol.
Oh, do you have one on Evie? Oh my God, I love it.
Because it's important to talk about things and be here for women's health and women's health inequities and amplify that. So that was just, this touch of what you guys talked about. It'll be available on our website and on YouTube. And Andrew, you are like the moderator with the mostest. So great job, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much to both of you, Andrew and Evie, for having me. And yeah, I loved it and glad we could be here.